Hi, I'm Christina,
And I'm Matt.
and this is New Wayz podcast. Today, our guest is a registered dietitian, Bree Bosson. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited. I feel like health is one of the most important things anybody can have. I've personally been on my own journey with a lot of things related to health, but how about you tell us, how did you get started? Like, what made you want to be a dietitian?
I think there's a lot of little things that kind of resulted in my decision to pursue dietetics. A lot of it was going back to like my own childhood as well and my own sort of journey with food. And also a lot of like I was a pretty active kid and I always thought of how food impacted like how I felt when I played competitive soccer. So it just kind of like fell into place. And then I just like sort of in high school had some thoughts on just kind of how food really does impact health and it's a huge component of it. And I had no idea you could even, have a career as a dietitian and really help people with their own relationships with food. So that's kind of how it sort of fell together.
I love that. So would you say that you've always had a healthy relationship with diet and food?
Yes, in a certain sense. I did struggle with like variety a lot when I was a kid. I was one of those typical like picky eaters and I really struggled with like branching out with foods. So I never, that was my like journey with food is being able to discover new foods and be willing to do so, which is a really hard thing. And it happened actually like a lot later in life than I imagined it would. And it was more in college when I started branching out. So yeah, that's my relationship with it.
What kind of things do you think instigates picky eating behavior in both kids and adults?
Like what develops it, kind of? That's a good question. I think it's more so, like eating habits they're habits, right? You develop them over so long of a time. So I think it's a lot of like how you're raised and if you are willing to have that new experience with food or if you're not pushed into it in a way, then you're never going to want to experience new things. So I think that's kind of what led me to like that picky eating in a sense. And same with adults. Like if you never want to branch out or you never sort of see the point of it or are pushed outside of your comfort zone, then you never do it.
Yeah. Interesting.
That is so true. Like I'll never forget growing up, we did eat a lot of the same meals very frequently, especially like parents, when you have a bunch of kids, you know what they like and you're like, please just eat it as long as it's somewhat nutritious. Especially the town I grew up into, it wasn't so diverse when it comes to cultures and different types of foods. The first time I had real authentic Mexican food, I was probably like 15 with some friends. Like we drove out to a different city close by and I was like, actual burrito, not from Taco Bell. Whoa. This is amazing. I could like after that I would bring it home to my sisters and food. It's so weird how it's like a culture aspect as well and it brings people together. But you are right. It's like everything's kind of product of your environment. So what you're surrounded with is naturally what you are going to eat and what you're going to do unless you decide to break the chain.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I love that. What other things besides just like picky eating do you see in kind of like the diet culture or problems that you see people struggling with?
Can you say that one more time?
So besides maybe like picky eating or people who don't want to diversify their palate and because part of having a healthy diet is having a variety of different foods and nutrition sources, correct? Like you can't just eat one vegetable. They say eat the rainbow. So besides just like a non-diverse food palate, not getting different types of nutrients, what other eating disorders, I guess, do you see?
Yeah. There's a lot of them. And specifically, I work in eating disorders, so I see a very wide variety of like all sorts of like relationships with food. Different types of eating disorders. Commonly it's restrictive eating disorders that result in, anorexia nervosa. There's other eating disorders that aren't quite as like well known, I would say, to like the lay person.
Okay.
Bulimia, binge eating disorder, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. There's one called OSFED. Like there's a lot of different diagnoses that people can sort of fall into these categories depending on their relationship with food and how they, what sort of struggles come up with it. So we've seen a variety of all of those things, and help those people on their sort of journey with their relationship with food.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about, now, a lot of us probably have heard a lot of these terms that you've discussed before, bulimia, anorexia, but
Restrictive eating.
restrictive eating. But you mentioned one there that I don't think a lot of people would know about. And I think it's a very fascinating eating disorder in a way, and it's ARFID. So could you talk to us a little bit about what ARFID is and also how that can formulate someone?
Yeah. ARFID's really interesting, and it's one of like the relatively sort of like newer diagnoses within the DSM manual. And ARFID, or avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, is kind of like there's sort of subcategories, but basically they all result in it's a restrictive eating disorder. So it results in poor intake, so poor nutrition status. But the difference between ARFID and anorexia is the thing that's like driving the behavior for restriction. So with anorexia, it's more of like this desire to be thin. Versus ARFID, there's a couple different categories. Some of them are more sensory or texture related. Some of them are like an adverse experience with food, like maybe choking or something that resulted in fear of eating. And then there's another that's just more of a disinterest in food, where someone's just not interested in eating food. And all of those result in like that same malnutrition status as like a restrictive eating disorder would.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, then it kind of seems like anorexia is more like intentional, like that you're restricting, where, is it ARFID you said? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Where that is more, you're not eating enough, but you also just don't have the urge to eat in a way. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's sort of a subcategory for like more the disinterested one.
Okay.
So they might still feel or like, acknowledge that they're not getting enough food, but the reason for that is different, based on like, I don't like this mushy texture, so I'm not eating. And usually it results in like entire food groups that are gone. So maybe someone is only eating like mac and cheese. And typically we see this one in sort of younger kids, but it can be like, it's still common in adulthood as well. So we see like the typical like kid food, I would say, like macaroni and cheese, things that feel like safer, French fries. Usually it's more like carbohydrate food groups that feel safer than, like proteins or vegetables or fruits.
Do you think there's a lot of people going around just living their life not knowing they have an ARFID disorder?
Potentially.
Interesting. Because I just think about that, like if you're not maybe too aware of the fact that you realize you only have certain foods, and then maybe you have to have someone tell you, be like, yo, you're only eating 4 or 5 foods. That's it. And that's your entire, existence.
Oh, I have friends to this day where I'm like, not to be this person, but you kind of eat like a big child. I'm like, can you please go eat a vegetable or something? I'm worried about your health. They're like, oh no, I'm fine.
Yeah.
But that's so intriguing.
Do you think that happens?
I think the difference between it is like usually the eating disorder diagnoses like results in issues like health issues, malnutrition, things like that. So, I mean, I think there's still like an interesting line that would be interesting to explore, more of like just the picky eating versus like an ARFID diagnosis.
Yeah.
But it's more of like extreme.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, I could also see how it goes undiagnosed as well pretty frequently, because like as long as you are getting adequate calorie intake, a lot of times people look on the surface level completely fine. You're a healthy weight. Like if people are like, oh, I'm healthy, I can walk fine, like everything's okay. But in reality though, there's so many more things that go into our health besides just like calorie intake and looking okay. Like a lot of people probably have nutrition deficits or deficiencies that they're unaware of because of only like eating essentially like a child sometimes, which is a lot of carbs and sugar. So I could definitely see where that goes undiagnosed frequently. Question for you guys too, speaking of this, because when you said French fries, I have a sister when we were like, we would call her the French fry queen because that's all she would eat for like 2 years was French fries. Thankfully, she diversified her palate now and she's a thriving adult.
Mm-hmm.
But did you guys have any foods you obsessed over when you were younger? Or still do?
Obsessed over.
Or like something that you just one of your
That was,
favorite
like, your
foods you
go-to
frequently
food.
eat, I guess. You could
Oh,
live off of
in
you
high
feel
school,
like.
it was pizza.
Pizza? What kind of
Literally,
pizza?
just cheese pizza.
Really?
Yeah.
Just cheese? That's so
Like,
boring.
I know. Was anything amazing?
Now it's tacos Galavon, guys.
Don't call me out like that. Please sponsor me. No, it's,
He loves your food. He eats it all the
I
time.
literally
But
eat
I
it all the time. Okay, fine. All right. Yeah. All right. Love being called out like that.
Okay.
No.
Mine were funky because I mean that was my like issue in a sense. I was obsessed with pickles. French fries
Stop.
also.
Oh.
You did not just say that because that's what I was gonna say.
Pickles?
To this day, I still am. Oh my gosh,
Pickles.
yes, they're the
Pickles?
best.
Pickles. Yes. They were the best.
What you don't? You're
I'm
not a pickle?
not a pickle fan.
Oh no,
I can't do pickles. It like
No, they're my go-to. I get extra pickles on my burger. There's always some in my
Same.
fridge. They're a nice little midnight snack.
no, it's the texture.
Really?
I kid
It's a
you not.
cucumber.
I know it's the rubber texture that like you eat, and it's like
I can see
kind of
that.
mushy, and I don't like it. Same with
missing
tomatoes
out.
for me. I can't do
Really?
tomatoes. Yep, it's
Tomatoes,
that.
I agree
I
with.
used
It's
to
that
not like
slimy.
tomatoes.
That
That's true.
if you cut me a
I used to think that mushrooms had the consistency of meat. I don't know why when I was younger I was like deathly afraid of mushrooms. I would not do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
It has that
That's
sort of like
valid.
yeah, I'm like
Yeah.
I agree. It has that sort of like umami, meaty flavor.
Yeah, but then
Yeah.
I do love how like obviously as we grow, so does our palate, and I'm like
Yes.
now things that I never used to eat before. Thankfully, pickles are still tried and true to me.
There you go.
I love that, which kind of reflecting on my stop laughing. You look like a pickle, Matt. Anyway,
I am. I'm green.
I love it. That does kind of bring me back, though. I do love pickles for the taste, and now it's not. I eat them obviously because I enjoy them, but I think back about when I was younger and diet culture too, like growing up in the 90s. I feel like one of the reasons why I started eating pickles as like a snack frequently was because I'm like, oh, it's 5 calories a stick. This is safe. You know what I mean? Because like, I'll be honest with you, looking at magazines back in the day, like watching America's Next Top Model, everyone was skinny. I could remember even at the age of like middle school, I was counting my calories. So what do you think, what do you think influences kids nowadays to kind of develop eating disorders or like anorexia, bulimia, like low calorie intake?
I think there's not like the research shows there's not like a single factor that contributes to the development of an eating disorder. They're very multifactorial.
Okay.
A lot of it is environmental too, like exposure to social media. There can be a familial component, like if mom suffered from an eating disorder too, or if it sort of like runs in the family in a sense. So yeah, there's a lot of different exposures to that would like result in this sort of behavior or an eating disorder. And most of the time, like the reason people develop an eating disorder is for control. Like it serves as control. So it kind of depends on like where someone is lacking control in their life. There's a lot of trauma related to them too. So someone with a severe trauma history can develop that as a form of control. So yeah, I think those are, it's very more multifactorial for that. But in terms of like social media, it's a huge influence. I mean, the clients that I work with talk about it all the time. There's so much exposure.
Yeah.
And there's like no filtering it.
Yeah.
And it's constant and it's toxic and yeah, I think that's a huge influence for sure.
Do you think also too like the rise in fitness trends? And
Oh
also
my God, there's
too,
a new
like,
trend like every time I go on the internet. I see
Really?
something else. And there's so much just now since we get so much information so fast, it's so conflicting also. Because so many people are telling you, eat this, eat that, don't eat this, don't eat that, do this workout. No, that workout's bad for you. Like I mean, honestly, I could see where it's like, what do I do? What do I trust?
Yeah.
Let me just try everything and put my body into a freak out mode.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, it's clients all the time
Yeah.
feel that way.
And also too like being, a former athlete yourself And then, seeing like a lot of like fitness trends now
Mm-hmm.
and, what people are sort of like gravitating towards. What are some things that, what are some like healthy movements and stuff that you feel are like able to really create like a good balance without having to be that sort of like, oh, you constantly have to be in a calorie deficit, or you
Mm-hmm.
constantly have to be, working out 24/7 if you want to lose X.
Yeah. Movement. I think of my boyfriend who's a physical therapist, and he always tells me that like the best form of movement is any sort of movement that you'll do and that brings you joy, especially like when you're considering older adults or something like that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think anything that brings you joy. I mean, if it feels like a chore and you're doing it to like punish yourself, then you're probably not doing it for the right reason, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that would make so much sense.
Yeah, because like I've heard there's like two people that show up to the gym, right? It's either the people that love their body and they want to be healthy and active, and there's the people that are showing up to the gym because they hate their body.
Mm-hmm.
Like, which
Yeah.
reason do you want to show up for? You know what I mean? And unfortunately, we do have both. And I'm also a firm believer too, is we are all different. We have different needs. We have different type of hormone levels, different
Yeah.
type of like things that are wrong with us and also good about us, I guess. But I'm a big fan of just listening to your body, because
Mm-hmm.
what's good for somebody else might not be good for you, and same vice versa. Like, some people can do hit workouts all the time and their body never gets inflamed. Other
Mm-hmm.
people doesn't. I'm a firm believer on just like listening to what feels good to you, what gives you energy. Some people can eat a bunch of food in the middle of the day and feel great and energized. Some need to take a nap after.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think that I mean, correct me if you guys think different, but I don't think there is one tried or true way that everybody should just stand by and do to lose weight or feel good. I think that like health is constantly just a discovery experiment about who you are and what actually resonates and what feels good to you.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing too is it's just like I do love kind of comparing the 90s to now, is I do
Mm-hmm.
love how we are addressing a little bit more of like a body positivity movement in a way. But at the same time though, I do see how that can be misleading to people as well, because they're like, what is a healthy body weight if we're seeing all these different stuff, and not to mention we're still getting all this information so fast. How would you suggest then people finding out what is good for them when it comes to like their diet or exercise? You said what feels good, but is there any like tried and true things that you would give people, like focus on this type of thing or this type of movement in a way?
Mm-hmm. I think like from the nutrition realm, it's more of like I always talk with clients about like just this concept of like everything in moderation
Mm-hmm.
and sort of like this all foods fit philosophy, like specifically when I'm working with eating disorder as well. So, but it's applicable to I think everyone,
Mhm.
um, because there's too much of a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So, and that can result also in the same like sort of damage to your body in a way. Um, so I think a variety of everything is best to sort of give you sort of like this well-rounded health. And then, it can get complicated and it gets specific depending on like specific diseases that you may struggle with or something like that. And then, yes, there are like specific recommendations for nutrition that, research has shown to be beneficial. But for like the general human who's just trying to be healthy,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that means for them, then sort of everything in moderation and kind of what brings them joy, like the movement thing.
Yeah, I do love that. I have a question for you too, because I'm a big believer in like, yes, you can want to do good for yourself, but a lot of times, like when you are so far one way, it's hard to get to another, especially when you don't know your reason why you started
Mm-hmm.
with the eating disorder in the first place. Can you tell me, do you often go on like discovery journeys with clients to find out where their relationship with food kind of formed in a way?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like an exploration of their past. And obviously, I'm the dietitian and their therapist is the one doing, sort of that deeper work
Mm-hmm.
with them and doing all the therapeutic things. But I also, do some of that as well on a lighter scale, obviously, to explore, yeah, where they've gotten the messages to view their body the way that they do, or to, feel about food the way that they do have those negative food judgments, like where did those come from? And a lot of it too is like the environment. So social media, there's a big like family component too, especially I work with kids specifically right now. So the family has a lot to do with it too. And like what they've seen parents do and how they've seen parents talk about their bodies and like what foods they say are okay to eat, what they're not.
What's it like doing that family education? Because I feel like that would be really intimidating. To have to,
Because
sit
you're
with
asking
some
an
of these.
adult to go against their like
Truly, I mean,
their
yeah,
truth,
you're
their programming, what they
Yeah.
believe.
absolutely.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
I do it with kids and behavior, it feels a little easier because it's just like, okay, these are like the signs that I'm seeing in your kid. This is what he has talked to me about. These are some recommendations I would make,
Mm-hmm.
based on like what your kid has shown me. But
Yeah.
when you deal with sort of food, like that's a human fundamental
Mm-hmm.
in a way. And so how do you go against and sometimes completely eradicate an entire system built that's, usually that was supposed to be, quote unquote, not support the kid?
Yeah. Very carefully.
Yeah.
It's a good
I
answer.
mean, no, it's true.
Yeah,
But
very
like,
careful.
how do you go about that very carefully?
Yeah. Honestly, sometimes it's not carefully at all. Sometimes it's very blunt. But I think it's more of just highlighting and putting it back towards like the kid, and like for me specifically in those cases, like this is what the child has shared with me about the family dynamic. Like, can you tell me more about that? And where do those things come from? How did you learn those things? And then it's being able, I mean, some families are not open to like trying to do anything differently or hear anything that you have to say. Some are. So you kind of do your best with those that are not. And the ones that are, you see a lot of growth and change. And that's especially with kids in eating disorder recovery, the family component is huge. If that's the person that they're looking up to, right? And they're learning from. So if they are able to change, then that helps the client like learn that their body is okay. All foods are okay. Yeah.
How do you dismantle parents' egos
Ooh.
when it comes to dealing with that?
I don't know.
It's okay.
I
No,
have
but
tried and failed.
yeah, but also I'm sure you've also tried and succeeded.
Yeah.
So how do you try and succeed?
I mean, I think it's like communicating with anybody when talking about behavior change is very difficult, as you know. Like,
Yes.
you can't just put them down and tell them everything that they're doing wrong or they're going to get defensive, right? Like, you have to be able to have communication skills too and like highlight the things that they're doing right and like the things that their kid is great at and stuff like that, to be able to like, what is it? The sandwich method of like the compliment and then throw in like, the
You got to
insult.
cushion it, then you
Yes,
give them the
and
blow
then you
really
do
quick.
another-
Yeah. And then you say,
exactly.
okay, but yeah, but that's
But then you
you're
follow
great.
it up with another
Yes.
compliment.
Yes.
Yeah.
The
So-
compliments just have to outweigh the negatives.
Yeah.
That's it. And I get that. Yeah.
And then you kind of gauge like, the parent, and if they're open to talking about those things, then you can just have at it and talk freely. If not, then you try to like cherry pick the most important messages too that are like the kid would benefit from the most from parent changing. And whether that's like, body acceptance, if a parent feels this child is too overweight and she needs to, she can't have any sugar, then it's a lot of education. And then you kind of highlight the point of, in that situation, it would be like, if they struggle with binge eating disorder, then educating that binge eating disorder is actually very restrictive in nature. And the more they restrict, the more they end up binging or wanting to. So the only way to recover from that is to allow those foods from the get-go, which is a very hard concept for parents to hear, especially when they feel, they've been told by their doctor that their kid is overweight and they need to lose weight and XYZ.
Wow. Because you're going against the
Yeah, especially when you
the
go against
system.
the doctor,
Yeah,
too.
especially going,
I don't like
whoa. Yeah.
Yeah. I could see that.
But also too, we've talked about how like doctors, like you said, have only see what's on
Doctors
the
are very
outside, but when you deal with the work
textbook
that
in
you
my
do,
opinion.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
They're
then
they don't see, yeah, doctors diagnose. That's what they do. They don't see like the nitty-gritty every single day lives of people. They honestly are too busy, or they
Yeah.
just don't get to see it. They see the
Right.
numbers.
At least like a family medicine doctor or something like that. You know,
Mhm.
there's obviously doctors that specialize in eating disorder
Yeah.
or like in, whatever else that would get a better picture. But yeah,
But
and
the
when
one who
you,
usually brings it to attention is like most
yeah,
people will go in for like their annual, take their
totally.
kids in, make sure they're good before going to school. Same with adults. You go into the doctor once a year, and that's when you find out what is going on with you.
Right.
And they can only just see the numbers. They don't know like the bigger picture of things.
Yeah.
That's why I also tell people all the time, like when you go to a doctor's office, or like if you do have to, God forbid, go to the hospital, please advocate for yourself. Ask all the questions, be annoying, because the more
Mhm.
that doctor does know about you, the more they can actually like give you more in-depth information and see the bigger picture, not just the numbers, where if you don't tell them anything, they're just gonna be like, oh, here you go.
Mhm.
Like you do have to advocate for yourself. You can't expect the doctor to care more about you than yourself. Not to be that person, but you can't.
Mhm.
So is that frequently what you see then, though? When you get hired to work with children, do most parents hire you because a doctor brought it to their attention, or do they usually see it and then go to you before that?
So where I work currently, it's more like there's sort of a level of care system within eating disorder that's actually pretty unique. Like it's kind of like a pyramid. Like the highest point of the pyramid is like the highest intensity of care, and that's usually hospitalization for the eating disorder. Typically, it's more, restrictive in nature that lead to, or like someone with a lot of struggles with purging that can lead to electrolyte abnormalities and,
And teeth decay.
yeah,
Definitely, yeah.
definitely. But that would like typically put them in the hospital. When they leave the hospital and they're diagnosed with the eating disorder, they usually go to a residential treatment facility, and that's like a home. It's sort of like a rehab, where people would go to like detox and things like that, but it's for eating disorder. So that's my area of work. And then there's like lower levels of care to essentially give them more independence as they progress in treatment. So that's usually like we're either getting them from the hospital or they're stepping up to us from the lower level of care.
Okay, so you see them when they've already developed an issue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fascinating. And also too, like you kind of shared a little bit on that pyramid. How long does that process take if you were to successfully
Oh.
complete it? Say you had started at inpatient at a hospital and moved your way through.
It's so dependent on the individual and like what they're willing to do when. Sometimes if it's hospitalization, like the eating disorder has gotten bad enough to, require a hospital. Typically they're, I'll say for like more of the kids, what I typically see is they're not really ready to recover at that point or wanting it. So when they're more resistant to it, it takes longer because they're, they usually don't do well at first. And sometimes it takes people like bouncing through like the levels of the pyramid several times to be like, okay, I'm done with this. I just lost, in my case, like all of my high school years were spent in residential treatment or, in some sort of treatment. I didn't get to experience high school and I'm sick of this. So now I'm going to do it. Sometimes it's like super quick and everyone's like, oh, I don't know if I can guess. Oh shit, I hit the hospital.
Yeah.
And now like this is the low point for me. So I'm just going to do it and I'm done. So it's one and done. But it's totally dependent on the individual.
How long does someone on average, so say you just one time through, on average, how long does someone stay in a residential program?
Maybe 8 weeks.
Okay.
It's still long, especially when you're young. I'm sorry, a few
That's a
weeks
long
seems
time
like
when
your
you're-
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're young, you feel like your FOMO is a thing. You feel like you're missing
Yes.
out on all these things. That I can imagine that's really rough on some people.
Yeah, we hear that a lot.
Yeah. Some adults now might be like, hey, it's a vacation away. But no,
Yeah.
I'm kidding. It's not a joking matter. But so my big goal in life is to have people identify problems before they become problems. I do believe that like early diagnosis and early recognition of things that could potentially escalate is key. Say all the time, because I've been an ICU nurse for like 7 years, I really just want to see less people in my bed. I want to prevent people from being here.
Mm-hmm.
So, are there any early warning signs that you've noticed that people can look out for, but when a disorder is starting to develop?
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, usually it's the parents that first notice something odd with their kid, I'll say. Um, I mean, it can be unintentional weight loss if you notice like their kids' clothes are fitting a lot looser than they typically are. If the kid is like going upstairs to their room to eat dinner instead of like sitting at the family table. Sometimes we see like a lot of the times kids like throw away their lunches at school. So it's kind of like checking in with your kid to see what they ate throughout the day. If they're isolating more, a lot of it is like emotional too. So obviously mental health. If they're isolating a lot, usually they'll like remove themselves from their friend group more for, you know, whatever reason it is. If they usually go out with food, or if they just like feel ashamed of their body or something like that. I think those are more the big ones that I would say parents notice more so.
Do you think friend groups can contribute to eating disorder sometimes?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is the environmental factor, right? So,
Yeah.
and kids are so heavily influenced by their peers, right? So, yeah, definitely hearing a lot of people with eating disorders.
I don't know why when you were talking, I just like had a flashback to
Yeah.
one thing that we would do when we were younger was like in middle school after the cool thing to do was like walk to McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember this girl I was friends with. Her dad was a bodybuilder.
Oh gosh.
And she said, a moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips. And that has stuck with me over like a decade now. I don't follow it, but I'm just like, that is crazy. We were in middle school and I remember hearing that.
That's intense. Middle school. Can you imagine like being 10 and like thinking about like the food that you're eating?
Yeah.
Well, I can imagine it because I was
know.
there. I definitely lack control in my childhood, but it's just like, to me, it's crazy how, and I grew up in a home where we did have a diverse amount of food, like different types of food available to us. We were never told like when not to, like very much my mom's an intuitive eater and she never told us, no, don't eat this. Or like, thankfully they were very body positive, but like, I don't know. I literally think it was TV and all these magazines and me watching like these models that I looked up to where I'm just like, I need to, and essentially like starve myself.
Yeah.
Like, it's so crazy how at such a young age, all these things can start. And now, like I said, too, with social media, it's just.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because I mean, a lot of us are exposed to that. So like, it's interesting to think of like, you know, 10 girls can be exposed to that same message and only one of them develop the eating disorder, but they're exposed to the same exact, you know, sort of messages. And obviously there's different components and, you know, privately and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's an interesting part of like development of eating disorder.
One huge thing that I'll never forget now that you guys are talking about this, I just remembered was I had an old client that she developed an eating disorder only because her brother called her fat one time. And it was just like the one word. And it sent her on a downward spiral for years. And I just like can never, and I just will never forget that moment. She told me that. And I was like, whoa, like words are impactful. Words mean something. And that just, that to me has been something that's always stuck with me. So ever since then, I've been so careful, you know, with my words and like how I talk about things and even my relationship food, even when it's with adults, because you never know how that other person may perceive that comment, even if it, you know, that like you meant no intention or harm by it. Like those things are so, so important. So yeah, I just thought that was one of the most like valuable things I ever learned from it.
Yeah. It made me think of like social media too, and sort of what we were talking about earlier of it's scary like that anybody can post anything out there and like send those sort of messages and not have any sort of like filters or protection against like a kid with, you know, who's 8 years old and has their iPhone and TikTok or Instagram out, you know?
Yeah.
How do you feel like there's ways to kind of help educate kids on regulating a lot of that in a world that's so unregulated?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think it's sort of like educating them before it gets to that point, if you can. Um, and sort of like, I think it goes back to like the home environment and like the messages that you send to the kid from home based on like, what parents are showing them too. Because they're going to be exposed to things, right? Like we can't like put them in a bubble or something. Same with like eating disorder recovery. Like they're going to be exposed when they leave residential treatment to triggering, situations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like arming them with as many coping skills and sort of like building them up so much so that you hope that they can like learn to manage that on their own. And I think that kind of starts at home.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if anything too, like you said, like kids do mimic a lot of times the adults in their life. And I'm like, I do believe that like parents, you are the biggest role model to your children. So if you can show up yourself and love yourself and realize that like comparison is only like a confidence killer and show that love and support to your child. Like, unfortunately, we cannot control what is out there in the world. We can't control what we're exposed to. We have some type of like filters that we can put on things, but things just pop up nowadays. I think it's just instilling in kids and as well as ourselves, like the confidence to love ourselves and to just look at nutrition and activity as a way to show up for ourselves and everybody else, whatever they say. Like, it's just words. It's somebody you're probably never going to see making that nasty comment who, honestly, I'm a firm believer, anybody who wants to hate on somebody else probably hates themselves a little bit too. So I don't know. That's why I think everything's so intertwined. That's why I'm huge on like holistic everything is like, because when your body feels good, your mind's going to feel good. And when your mind feels good, your body follows along with it too. And I thought that was so great how you mentioned again, just how that one word stuck with somebody, because we oftentimes do have these underlying things that pop up in our life and we don't know why they stick with us, but they do. And it's just being conscious of those things and how it influences us to realize if it was just something that hurt us in the moment or if it's some like a truth that we believe. And if it's a truth that's impacting us negatively and we see that it's impacting us negatively, how can we move forward in the right direction?
And a big thing too I want to talk about in regards to trauma is fear foods. Because I think that is also something that I'm sure you guys discuss a lot about. And so I would kind of love for you to educate us a little bit on what fear foods are and kind of how some ways to kind of help people that you've helped people overcome what those fear foods are.
Yeah. Fear foods is kind of like just like a little term that was kind of caught on, and it's used a lot in eating disorder. And it's basically just a food that your eating disorder is afraid of, right? So sometimes people don't like to refer to them as a fear food. Sometimes they don't care. So
would these be foods that make you healthy? Or
foods that the eating disorder is avoidant of? Typically, it's the things like, like junk foods. So
got it.
Pizza or burgers or, candy bars or things like that. Sometimes it's a little different, but those are typically what we see most commonly. It's super important in recovery to be able to like sort of neutralize your thoughts around those foods, because there's been a lot of historically like negative connotation for those foods, right? So being able to recover from your eating disorder means being able to heal your relationship with food, which means being able to neutralize a lot of your judgments on foods and being able to include them all. So we do a lot of work with, depending on what they're willing to do, with exposure to those foods in treatment. And we see a lot of progress with it, which is fun.
How do you do those food exposures?
It depends on the diagnosis too. ARFID has their own sort of like method, I'll say, for exposures to those things. And those are a lot more carefully done because we don't want to traumatize them more. Usually it's things that maybe they've never had before in their life with ARFID. And we're exposing them to that food for the first time. So we like kind of meet them where they're at. And then maybe it's more like a sensory experience is what we do with these exposures. And we're trying to sort of like help them navigate and cope with their anxiety that comes up, and also be able to like lean into the new experience with trying a food. And sometimes they end up liking it and sometimes they don't. And that's
Yeah.
okay. But it's basically like maybe the first step is just picking up the food. And sometimes it's like looking at it and tolerating it. Sometimes the client like won't even touch it at
Really?
first. Sometimes they'll like physically like turn away from it, push it away because it's so distressing to them. So step one is maybe just tolerating the food being there. And then we work up to eating it. So it can be a slow process.
What kind of food that you would say like is there like a very common food group that you see among ARFID diagnosis?
The foods that are generally more accepted and eaten by them are more carbohydrate foods. So like the easily palatable foods.
Okay.
So French fries are just easy, right?
Yeah.
So things that are like more complicated, with a lot of spices or a lot of vegetables, like the bitter taste. Sometimes, most kids don't like bitter. But I would say carbs are more accepted by them. And then it kind of depends on the individual for what's not.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What's been a fascinating like not food for like a client you've had?
Not tolerated?
Yes.
Or not liked? Let me think. There's like very specific fruits and vegetables sometimes. Like a strawberry, I remember someone didn't like the way it looked because of all the
little
texture
seeds on it. I can
Uh-huh.
get that.
Yeah. And yeah, things like that. I remember someone specifically struggled with that. And then sometimes it's like foods touching each other. It could be any food.
I used to be one of those people.
Yeah.
They can't
Interesting.
touch.
Mhm.
Now it's like whatever.
Right,
But
right.
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you purposely would have foods then touch each other, and then they would have to sit and
Kidding.
Yeah.
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 I mean, that's fascinating.
Those are,
That's
like, some
really
of my
interesting.
favorite
I'm
things
just
to do.
I'm like so curious by that.
Mhm.
So
Those are like the most, I feel like, I mean, it's all rewarding, but those are like the most rewarding in that moment because you're like, oh my God, you like just had your scariest food that you
mhm.
could have possibly imagined and you just like ate a grape,
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's the little victories where you're like, yes.
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
yay, go you. And you work for weeks on these things.
Yeah.
That's
think
got to
it's
be
wonderful.
such a fulfilling job
Mhm.
to be able to do this not only with adults but also kids in that way. Because I work with kids as well, but in a different capacity. But it's like when you have those little wins and you have those little moments that feels like it changes someone's identity
Mhm.
or core, or
Mhm.
just you can just see it, and
Yeah.
that just it's one of the best feelings in the world. It's one of the biggest fuelers that
Mhm.
I use every day to keep doing what I do, because I just like when I get to have those moments, and that it's a very, very special feeling.
Yeah, it is. It's very special because it's also a really hard area to be in too, like emotionally for everyone. Um, and yeah, when those little moments, like the little wins, it's so like nice to see the client recognize their win too, and be able to like look back on that experience too when they doubt themselves in the future, because they always do again. And you
Yeah.
can pull that out and be like, you already did it.
Oh, I
You know,
love
you
that.
just
I
did
love
that.
reflection. I'm like, I get it
Yeah.
seems scary right now, but you've done it before.
Yeah.
Like, take some time and look back at everything you've accomplished because you can do it again.
And
Powerful.
it is. And speaking about power, and something I would also love to know, this has got to be a very draining job. At the same time, I can imagine the amount of energy and work that you put into being able to help these kids. And some of the kids are extremely resistant
Mhm.
to accepting that help or wanting that help. And I feel like that too can be very draining for you. And so I would love to know a little bit, what are some things that you do to kind of keep your peace?
Mm. I think this past year has been really hard, just having like some difficult cases. And I took up reading this year and I like use it as an escape. So that definitely helps me like take myself out of like my own life for a little bit, an hour a night or something like that. And I find that to be like very grounding again and like fuels me. And also I think just in healthcare in general, like you have to be able to have strong boundaries for yourself, right? Like not go to that extra shift that they need coverage for or something for you.
Oh,
right?
definitely not. No, like my days are for me and doing what I need to do. But
She's the queen of boundaries.
I love
I will
that.
say, like, it's
you
impressive.
have to.
It is
Me
impressive.
too.
Because I love all my struggles in life because they've literally have been my biggest lessons. And I've been that person working there was a point I was working 72-hour work weeks. And after I looked horrible, I felt horrible. I'm like, no, I was telling somebody this week, actually, I'm like, I need my me days at least once a week. I try to have a day where the mornings I can get like emails or like some podcast stuff or one client out of the way and the rest of the days for me. It's like, why do I feel like you have a lot of me days? I'm like, I definitely do because it's needed. I feel like everybody needs to set healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
In order to, because I tell people this all the time and I hope you can agree, is if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else.
Yeah, you don't have the capacity to.
No.
And that definitely comes out a lot in at least my line of work.
Yeah.
You know?
I love how
It's
your self-care though is also something that can like expand your horizons and your knowledge as well though.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I love to cook. And I love my boyfriend and I go out a lot for like hikes and we like to be in nature. So we go spend a lot of time outside.
It's very
garden.
grounding.
It is grounding. Today it's raining and I even had to sit outside for a little bit and meditate. I'm like, I need earth. But question for you in regards to then when it comes to like cooking and eating out, I feel like in the adult world, at least now, everybody's trying to find like the healthiest options, you know, like all of a sudden this food is bad for us, or there's this toxin, this color in this, all the gums are bad for you. Like, don't buy this brand. What is something that you think people should kind of steer clear of, or something you think that's actually an amazing new superfood that you've learned of? Do you have any things like that that you follow in your daily life? Like try to stay with whole foods?
Completely, honestly, no.
No?
Interesting.
Nope. I just do everything in moderation kind of thing. So like practicing what you preach is like literally actually what I do.
That's what Lindsay said.
Really?
Lindsay talked about.
Yeah.
From Owl.
Oh,
Anyways.
practice. Oh, yeah. Cause
Talking about moderation.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah.
keep going.
No, that's
It
so
is-
true. We had a bone
yeah.
broth.
Extraordinaire.
Extraordinaire on here.
Literally.
She said the same thing. She's
Yeah.
like, I'm all on gut health. I do believe, and she made fun of me for saying 75, 25%. I do believe that like 75% of your stuff should be like things that are good and nourishing for you. But you're right though. Like if you hide from the other stuff that's not necessarily good for you, you're just going to end up craving it and eventually develop a disorder.
It's
Potentially.
harder to be able to eat those things in moderation then at that point.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bigger picture and it's like so much easier said than done. But I feel like it's about like trusting your body too, to be able to like your body knows what to do with food, right? It doesn't recognize that you're eating a cookie versus like a piece of fruit or something,
Yeah.
right? Like it digests all those things the way it needs to and uses everything for energy, right?
Yeah.
So your body knows what to do with it. It doesn't assign like a moral value to those types of foods. Yes, there are foods that obviously have different nutritional components to it and have, are linked to different health benefits and things like that, which is where the moderation piece comes in, right? So it's not like sitting there eating a whole plate of cookies or something like that instead of dinner. It's like being able to have dinner and you have your balanced meal with
And
your
have your
protein.
cookie at the end.
And
Yeah.
then you have your cookie at the end.
I'm a big
and you
dessert
enjoy it.
person. I love my desserts. I know you do too, Matt.
No, I don't.
No?
Everyone knows.
But how do you feel then? Because this is, I think my ick when it comes to food is processed food, though. How do you feel about that? Because I also do believe like you can have more wholesome versions of cookies and all these like sugar-filled foods. But do you think that some, like, I don't know.
I mean, I'm not having a cookie because I want this wholesome version of it. I want
Really?
a cookie because I want a cookie. You
Yeah,
know?
I
And
get that.
And there's probably delicious.
Yes.
There's delicious versions of like, the more wholesome ones, which, if I
I
like
found
that
some
better,
healthier
then
cookies
sure.
that are amazing.
Perfect.
I'm like,
Then
yes.
that's great.
Yeah.
Good. I want my Chips Ahoy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chips Ahoy.
I don't know.
I
Processed
don't know.
food just gives me the ick. I could be wrong, but we've seen such an increase in like cancers over the past decade, and I can't help but think it's because all this like artificial food that we've been consuming. That's just a theory of mine. It's not proven, but that's why I have the ick from it. So
I think that's where it gets difficult, is because we don't have the evidence to prove it. So why are we fear mongering all these things when we don't have the evidence for it? And yes, there, like we said, like there's proven. Obviously, I wouldn't be a dietitian if I didn't, believe in this, but like there's proven benefits to like fruits and vegetables and whole grains and like lean meats and all those things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean never have
I agree with
those
that.
things.
Yeah.
So it's like that moderation piece, which I feel like I said, is so much easier said than done, because what is moderation and how do we figure that out? Because in eating disorder, it's very much like, okay, well, I can never have that thing. And I think moderation is having one bite of a cookie this year.
I can't have one. Oh yeah, that's true. Moderation, but I can't have just one bite of a cookie. I have to finish that thing. I don't have that much self-control.
But it's so true though, because like everyone has their own thing. I think that's a huge part of society, and something we struggle with is like those foundational rules that so many people want to live by. And they're like, what is healthy eating? What is, and I think, and I come immediately, I come back to what Lindsay said, like, if you love yourself, you will love the food and your body will love you.
Yeah.
And I think like stuff like that is so important, and it's so healthy, because if I feel happy eating chocolate cake, a slice of chocolate cake, then psychologically I'm going to feel a lot better and feel better about myself than per se, eating.
If you're telling yourself, why am I
like
doing this?
Carrots and ranch as my
yeah.
substitute, and then regretting it later and feeling sad because I had carrots and ranch. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's extremely specific because it's true.
Yeah.
Did you have that experience recently, Matt? Did you turn down the cake for carrots?
I did. And it was regretting.
Yeah, I think that's a really hard thing. Yeah, the moderation piece is like, it's hard.
Yeah, but I love that though, because like, just love yourself. Do everything for like that you just think is good for you and love doing it. Don't do it because you hate yourself. Do it because you want what's best for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if it's not good for your body, sometimes it's good for the soul. I love
It
that.
is.
Yeah. And try to get, there's more like, there's so many different like components to eating too, or like there's different roles food have. Like it's can be a form of joy too. It can be a form of nutrition. Like it's a lot of different stuff rather than just like fuel for your body. Yes, that's a big component of it, obviously. But there's more like sort of emotional components
social
too.
Components to it too, religion components to it too. Like food is such a diverse thing in our cultures.
Yeah.
So I love that. But kind of to wrap things up then, if you could give any advice to our viewers, what would it be?
I'll say it one more time. Everything in moderation. I think, just allow yourself to trust in your body, I think, and allowing yourself to enjoy the things that you know you enjoy, like the chocolate cake and things like that. And also knowing that you probably know it's like also beneficial for you to eat fruits and vegetables and whole grains and all those things. So finding some sort of balance that doesn't lead to like the regret or the feeling deprived, and like avoiding those thoughts of guilt afterwards too, because food really shouldn't take up that much of your brain space, and if it does, then that's kind of a red flag. You have so many other important things to think about.
That is so true.
I was gonna say thank you for saying that, because I feel like I even need to
say
hear
it
that
one more time
sometimes.
for the people in the back.
Everyone's like, I'm meal prepping for the next 2 weeks. Thank you. And I need to have this many macros and this prioritized. You're right. We need to conserve our energy for other things in life sometimes. And thank you so much for that.
Truly, thank you. You are our first guest for 2025.
Wow.
So
I'm blessed.
It feels like a year has already passed. I don't know what's going on, but no,
January
that's so true.
was wild, you guys. Oh my God.
That was the longest year of my life.
I know.
No, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you for waiting for me.
It's raining here, you guys. We're not used to rain in California. No, in LA, I guess. But we need it desperately.
We did.
So, but no, of course. I'm so happy that you came and were able to make it here. And just thank you for so much of that beautiful insight. It's really appreciated.
It's incredible. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, until next time, guys, I love you.
And thank you so much, and keep shining your light.